Hello and welcome to Everything Explained. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a core habit of every human brain, our love affair with patterns. Why do patterns pull us in? How do they shape what we learn, what we fear, and what we admire? By the end of this episode, you'll see that pattern hunting isn't a fancy trick some people have. It's how our brains stay efficient, fast, and alive in a messy world. Let's start with the big idea. The world is full of regularities, and our brains are built to predict what comes next. When you walk into a room, your brain doesn't catalog every detail from scratch. It uses old patterns to guess where the light switch is, what people will do, and what the next word will be in a sentence. That guessing game is not lazy thinking, it's smart problem solving. Every time your brain's prediction matches reality, your brain gets a tiny reward. The hit of dopamine you feel when you anticipate a familiar song or finish a common phrase is basically your brain saying, "Good job, you got it right." That reward makes you want to try again. That brings us to the mechanism in plain terms. Think of your brain as a detective who constantly builds and tests hypotheses about the world. It looks for patterns, be it the way grammar hangs together, the way a traffic light cycles, or the rhythm of a joke. When the pattern holds, the detective gets a confident lead and moves faster. When it doesn't, the detective updates the theory. Over time, this prediction loop becomes a kind of mental habit. In technical terms, it sits on the idea of predictive coding or a Bayesian brain. We're constantly weighing what we expect against what we actually observe, and we prefer the lighter, more certain explanation if possible. You can see pattern love in everyday life. Think about music. A song follows a pattern, a beat, a chorus, a familiar melody, and when you hear that structure coming, you anticipate the next note or lyric. The brain lights up a little when your prediction is confirmed, and music feels satisfying not just because of emotion, but because of pattern reinforcement. Language is another great example. We absorb grammar by spotting rules that repeat across sentences. Reading is basically pattern recognition stitched to meaning. We learn to predict which word should come next, and that prediction speeds up understanding. Patterns also help us save energy. The brain is a hungry organ. It wants to avoid wasted effort. When it can rely on a familiar pattern, it uses fewer resources to interpret what's happening. That's why we can drive a well-known route with only half our attention. We're pattern-building creatures, and those patterns extend to our social lives too. We infer others' intentions from familiar cues, like tone of voice or facial expressions. That quick read helps us respond quickly, which in turn keeps us safer and more socially skilled. Of course, there are quirks and even hazards in pattern seeking. Our brains sometimes see patterns where none exist. That's apophenia, seeing faces in clouds, or believing a random run of numbers is signaling a hidden plan. It's not just harmless superstition, it's a side effect of trying to stay efficient. The bias can lead to overconfidence, the gambler's fallacy, or jumping to conclusions when the data is thin. So pattern loving is a double-edged sword. It speeds up learning, but it can mislead if we don't check reality. The flip side is how wonderful pattern seeking can be for creativity and science. Creativity often comes from recognizing familiar patterns and then bending them in new ways. A songwriter plays with expected chords, and the surprise comes from how the pattern is stretched just enough. In science, we notice recurring regularities, form a hypothesis, and test it. The patterns are the map that guides you, but the real exploration comes when you question which patterns are useful and which are artifacts of our own minds. So, what should a curious listener take away? First, patterns are not the whole story, but they're essential scaffolding. They let you learn language, ride a bike, understand a joke, and read other people's moods. Second, be aware that pattern hunting can latch onto the wrong things. Pause when something feels overfit or too neat. Often, a messy reality deserves a closer look. Finally, celebrate patterns as the brain's way of making life navigable, not as a guarantee of truth. Let the pattern hunger guide you toward evidence, curiosity, and better questions. So next time your brain lights up at a pattern, the way a melody hints at what comes next, or the way a rumor in a room seems to fit the story you already tell yourself, remember this: your brain is not being mysterious. It's busy being efficient, predictive, and alive in a world that loves to be grouped, organized, and understood. And that, in its own quiet way, is what makes being human so endlessly interesting. So stay curious, keep pattern hunting wisely, and keep learning. That is the most human thing we do.